It seems to border on scandal, yet it is concrete, verifiable news that raises a disturbing question. In the not-too-distant future, could being Christian become a crime? It might seem like an exaggeration, almost a provocation, but instead, 2 episodes begin to give the impression that something is moving in that direction. Stay with us until the end, because what is happening concerns every Catholic. There's a thin thread running through the West. It's not visible to the naked eye, but it's felt like a shiver under the skin. The feeling that something is changing in the relationship between state and faith. For years, we were assured that religious freedom was an indisputable pillar of modern democracies. Today, we are no longer so sure. What's happening in different, far-flung countries tells a different story, and the Canadian case, along with the Spanish one, presents itself as the first test of a trend that could affect us all. On one side of the Western world, Canada, a country celebrated as a model of civil rights, openness, and inclusion. This is where the federal government introduced Bill C-9, a measure that, according to many observers, could irreversibly redefine the line between religious opinion and a hate crime. The debate is complex, of course, but the question that emerges is surprisingly simple. When a believer affirms what his faith has taught for centuries, can he be investigated? And above all, who decides what can still be said? The scope of Bill C-9 is broad, but one point in particular has raised alarm: the possible removal of the exemption that protects sincerely held religious beliefs in cases of alleged hate speech. This means that what a church defines as morally disordered, what a catechism considers sinful, could be reinterpreted as an act of criminal hostility toward a protected group. It's the erosion of a red line that, until now, seemed impossible to cross. For example, the Church has always taught, and does so in all the catechisms of the world, that certain moral choices, including those concerning sexuality, must be oriented toward virtue and chastity. It is an ancient teaching, repeated for centuries by saints, theologians, and pontiffs, and rooted in the evangelical words, "The truth will set you free." Yet, in some emerging legislative contexts, even simply reiterating this principle, that is, affirming that a conduct, according to Catholic morality, is not in line with the gospel, can be interpreted as a hostile or discriminatory expression. Not because the phrase incites violence, but because its very existence contradicts the sensibilities of the time. And while in Canada, they are debating the future of the freedom to proclaim what a community believes, something even more concrete is happening in Europe. The news comes from Spain, where the prosecutor's office has opened official proceedings against José Ignacio Munilla, one of the bishops most recognized for his doctrinal clarity. His crime, having explained during a radio broadcast the moral and pastoral implications of a law that punishes so-called conversion therapies. He distinguished between coercive abuse and spiritual accompaniment. He cited penalties and articles. He did what a pastor does when commenting on a legislative text. Yet all this was enough for an almost publicly invisible association to report him for inciting hatred. The Madrid prosecutor's office hasn't closed the case. It has opened a file, and the investigation is ongoing. A bishop who comments on a law is treated as if he had incited violence. It's a symbolic break, a signal that speaks louder than words. Because if even those who speak in continuity with the Catechism risk being summoned by a magistrate, it means that it's no longer the phrase itself that's under scrutiny, but the entire doctrinal horizon that supports it. The two cases, Canada and Spain, seem distant, but instead they respond to each other like two sides of the same coin. In both, a new principle emerges. What the Church has taught for centuries risks being tolerated only if reinterpreted, softened, and emptied of its strength. The impression is that in an age that proclaims freedom as the supreme value, there is increasingly less room for one freedom in particular, that of publicly professing a faith that does not change with the fashions of the times. This isn't, strictly speaking, a political dispute, nor is it an internal church issue. It's a cultural clash. It's an attempt to redefine public space, establishing what can be said and what must be silenced. It is no longer just the individual priest or bishop who is targeted, but the very structure of doctrine. Where once the state guaranteed protection so that all religions could express themselves without fear, today it seems to want to intervene to establish which forms of religion are socially acceptable and which can suddenly become suspect. The issue becomes even more delicate when considering the reactions within the Church. Some, fearing misunderstanding, prefer to remain silent. Some people use ambiguous language, convinced that blurring the lines between truths can ensure more peaceful coexistence. And then there are those, like Bishop Munilla, who choose not to give up clarity, even knowing that transparency today can become a risk. It's a bitter paradox. At a historical moment, when faith should offer a point of reference to a disoriented world, it is precisely that voice that is being questioned, contested, and sometimes even investigated. Anyone observing the international scene notices a slow but steady, almost imperceptible movement. The transformation of the believer from a citizen who is the voice of his community to a potential defendant if what he says does not coincide with the prevailing sensibility. The point is simple. You're not judging violent behavior or an insult. You're judging a moral interpretation. And if the state decides that religious morality must be subject to external criteria, then we are witnessing an epochal change, no longer a state that protects the freedom of the Church, but a state that supervises it. Canada could therefore be the first laboratory, Spain, the first explicit judicial precedent. And the rest of the West? It could follow, not by explicit will, but by the inevitable logic of a culture that rejects the very idea of objective truth and relies solely on the sensibilities of the moment. Ultimately, the question that hovers is simpler than it seems. To what extent will it still be possible to publicly profess what the Church has always taught? We're not talking about politics. We're not talking about power. We're talking about freedom, true freedom, the kind that doesn't depend on the whims of a majority, but on the dignity of each person. If you appreciate our outreach and believe this work deserves to continue, please consider leaving us a super thank you. It's a small but crucial gesture that makes every new piece of content possible. Your support is a vital part of this mission. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts. What do you think? If you liked the video, comment, Amen. God bless you.